So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining our presentation today, which is called Leveling Up Your Leadership. My name is Christina Ulrich, and I'm the Interim Executive Director of Beta Gamma Sigma, and I'm so happy to join you all today for the intro portion of our presentation. I wanted to jump in and introduce our presenters, their company, and to thank you all for taking your time to be a part of the BGS Advantage webinar series, which, as you can see on the slide, is brought to you in part by the generous support of KPMG. We want this webinar to be interactive, and we want you to walk away with actionable advice and answered questions. So in order to deliver on that goal, I'd like to start with just a few quick housekeeping items. So we've been interacting with people in the chat already, so please do tell us hi, tell us where you're zooming in from, what chapter you're from, say hello to your fellow members. We've even had people share their LinkedIn profiles in the chat. So please do that. However, keep in mind, if you have any questions for our presenters today, there is actually a Q&A section, which you can find if you're on your computer. There's an icon toward the bottom of your screen. So if you do have questions, please make sure you're typing them in the Q&A to make sure that they don't get lost, although we will have some team members who are interacting in the chat as well. My team member, Matt, will actually be moderating some Q&A sections at predetermined points throughout the presentations, but you can submit your questions at any point during the presentation, and we're going to do our best to get through as many as possible. Please also be aware that we are recording this presentation. While your cameras aren't on, we are recording this, and we'll make the presentation available on demand on the BGS Career Central website in the next few days. So if you'd like to revisit the content, it should be there again in the next few days. After the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to give us some of your feedback via a very short Zoom survey. So I certainly thank you in advance for taking a few moments to complete that survey. It'll help us shape the future of our programming to meet the needs and demands of our membership. Before I introduce the individual presenters today, I'd like to briefly touch on Beta Gamma Sigma's relationship with their company, which is called Cartavera. So Cartavera is a BGS member-owned organization which focuses on leadership development in a virtual environment. BGS officially partnered with Cartavera earlier this year, offering our members an opportunity to join the Cartavera tribe at a discounted rate. I've personally taken advantage of their monthly digital meetups called Mastermind Monday, and their Impact Leadership podcast is outstanding if you're looking for some professional inspiration. They've also developed a new program on becoming a confident leader, and they've been generous enough to offer a BGS member discount specifically for participants on the call today. So please stay tuned for more details there. And if you're interested in learning more about Cartavera, you can of course visit our website. They're in our member benefits section, or you can visit their website, which is cartavera.com. And if you want to listen to their podcast, you can find that at leadershipjunkies.com. And I will put both of those URLs into the chat. So that brings me to our presenters. So Craig Mathews is CEO and Chief Visioner of Cartavera. He's an experienced Chief Technical Officer, revenue architect, and a serial entrepreneur who has led or been a part of 7 startups. Craig is a BGS member. He's the president of the Raleigh-Durham BGS Alumni Chapter. Jeff Nischwitz is co-founder and chief shift officer of Cartavera. Jeff is a speaker, a business coach, a consultant, and author of 4 leadership and business books and a wealth of knowledge. I always come away with tidbits from Jeff that, little sound bites that I want to remember. So please join me in welcoming Craig and Jeff, and I will give the floor to you.
Great. Thank you for the introduction.
Thanks, Christina.
Yeah, it's so good to be here. So we had a couple months ago, we were talking about the management side of things and becoming a more confident manager. This time we're going to kick it up a little bit. So leveling up your leadership is all about some more advanced moves. So we got some of the basics into what it's like to be the first-time manager. But now we're going to be talking a little bit more about how do we build the kind of culture that we want in our leadership as well. So leveling up your leadership.
And one thing to talk about before we jump into that, I want you all to just plant this seed right now. This has nothing to do with your position. Nothing. So you may be saying, well, I'm a manager, so, oh, this is for when I'm a leader. No, this is about leadership, and leadership is about what happens in the moments, in the situations. So when we talk about leveling up your leadership, it doesn't matter where you are in the organization, where you are in your career, frankly, where you are in your life. These are going to be tools you can use every day to enhance your impact. That's what we're here to talk about today, leadership and impact.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we're looking at here is what's the difference between impactful leadership and effective leadership or management. And really, when we get into that, there's what would you say is the big key difference that you see, Jeff?
Well, the key is really simple. Impactful leadership is about people. Effective leadership is about processes and systems and about performance. Yeah. And we have become a culture, unfortunately, in my opinion, that's so focused on effectiveness and execution and performance. Yes, sometimes performance of people, that the people side has become the other. It's the extra. It's the nice to have. We create impact through people. Here's the thing. I would argue with any positional leader, we don't create impact by a better process. We create impact when we have processes that make sense and our people collectively are aligned, they're committed, they're inspired, they're motivated, they're working together, all the things that are part of culture. That's where the magic happens. And impact is about the magic, not the nuts and bolts of, yeah, we got better at this.
I think the other side of impact also is that when you think about the people that you're working with, you have the ability not just to impact them, but everybody around them, their families, the people they come in contact with, and ultimately their careers and potentially even their lives. Some of the training that we can offer can go beyond just the technical stuff that we do inside of the business. If we actually help them learn how to communicate better or improve their relationships, that doesn't just help at work, that helps everywhere.
Well, and it's interesting that we say that because the studies have shown for decades now, I won't say for, 30 or 40 years because we weren't looking at it, but the last 20 years, there's so much out there about team engagement and how do you engage people and the value of engaging your people and how important it is to have those good relationships at work. And yet organizations in general and many positional leaders are not being intentional about creating an environment where those things thrive. Yeah. Yet we know that's what's important. And so, frankly, sometimes we wonder, is anybody listening? Because we know this intuitively, but it's not showing up in our day-to-day activities, because that's what leadership is. It's how are you showing up as a leader every day?
Yep. And one of the things that we talked about in our last presentation was about the time that we spend with the people that we were managing or leading. And really that's so important, because when you think about your relationships, what's one of the key factors of building your relationship? It's spending time together. And in the same way, how can we really help our people if we're not getting to understand what drives them, what is meaningful to them? For example, if we're wanting to motivate or encourage somebody, incentivize, do we give everybody the same thing, or do we find out what's unique to this person? What would really jazz this person up versus, just kind of giving a gift card that nobody really wants? So we need to get serious about connecting with our people, but also growing our people. And Jeff and I look at it as we're growing our people, not just for the specific technical jobs that they have. Everybody needs to do that, yes. But we also want to grow them in the ability to function as human beings. So the relationship side, the communication side, the emotional management, these are all very important things.
And I think the key thing to keep in mind when we think about leadership, again, it's not positional, but if we were to look at a bucket and say, what is in the leadership bucket?
Yeah,
we would say there's really just two things. And it covers a lot. One is people. People are in the leadership bucket. We don't lead processes. We do not lead processes. We do not lead innovation. We lead the people who are innovating. We lead the people who we have created a culture and an environment where people are encouraged to innovate and be creative and to make mistakes. So leadership is about the people side. And yes, to some degree, it's about the strategy and vision side. But you all know people in your lives today, probably you yourself, that you may not be the strategic thinker yet, but if you're helping to grow people and you make everyone around you better, then you're a leader. And that's what we're here to talk about today. How do we grow the people around us? Because that's what leadership really is about.
So true. Well, one of the things that we look at is how to humanize your leadership. When we look at it, sometimes we just don't think that people bring themselves to work, and sometimes they're not allowed to bring themselves to work. We have one of our podcast guests was Larry English, and Larry English is with Centric Consulting. Jeff, why don't you tell a little bit more about that story?
Yeah, so Centric Consulting is about 20 years old now, 21 years. Larry is one of the co-founders. I'm familiar with Centric because one of my good friends back in Cleveland, Ohio, Joe Schmutzny, runs the Cleveland office of Centric. They are a technology business analytics company. They're a consulting company. Today, they have 1,000 people. They've never had an office. They've never even had a central office. So they've done this remotely. They've created an incredible culture. I've seen it from close friends, and they have people that it's a family. They care about each other. They work well together. Their retention is crazy, especially in that industry. They invest so much time in their people to help them grow, not just professionally, but also personally. They're constantly asking, what do you want? What do you want this to be for you? And what Larry said on the podcast is, the question was, come on, Larry, you've built this incredible culture. Is there a secret sauce? And he didn't hesitate. He said, there is. He said, it's two things. Number one, leaders, starting with me, must model vulnerability. And number two, we invite our people to bring their personal lives to work. We invite it. Now, to me, unfortunately today, that's crazy talk, but that is leadership. And that's what's needed today. And that's what's working today, is when you have that culture, you say, not only are you allowed to be a human here, we invite your humanity here through your personal life and through vulnerability.
Yep. And one thing I think Jeff didn't mention is that Centric Consulting is completely online. So there's no office. They are all remote. And yet they have a culture that's more like a family. Really, really interesting way to look at things. One thing we were kind of talking about this is the sign that should be in many of the offices around, which is this: no humans allowed. You got to leave your problems and your empathy at home. We can't afford to actually care about the people around us, because if we did that, wow, we might make some weird decisions.
And part of the problem with that, some of you may be saying, well, of course I'm human as a leader. And I'm here to tell you, I'm going to say from my experience, I'll limit it to mine, the majority of leaders that I meet are not exercising humanity in their leadership. They're not. They're treating people like, how often do we say things like, oh, our people are our most valued resource. They're our most valuable asset. That's dehumanizing. I see the people as an asset. They help us win, but I don't see them as a person. We also, one of the big mistakes we make around humanizing leadership and the people is we believe that the personal stuff going on in their lives, we label it as drama. It's not drama. It's just what's going on in their life. It becomes drama if if we're coming in and we're just slamming it into everyone's faces. But the fact that things are happening in our lives is not drama. That's just human.
Yep. It's so important that we actually take the time to hear out what's going on in people's lives. If you see somebody's performance lagging, we could just jump to the assumption that they're incapable and fire them, or we could actually have a conversation with them and say, hey, Jeff, I noticed that your performance seems to be slipping a little bit. Let's talk about it. Is there anything going on with you? Is there something that we could help with? How different does that feel than, hey, Jeff, you're not hitting your numbers. What are you going to do about it?
Well, what I'm going to respond with that, Craig, is there's a question that was perfectly timed here in the chat, actually, from Kate. And she said, can you speak a little bit about when there's too much humanity and how to handle it? When someone's got constant chaos in their life. Here's what I would say, and this, I'll just be direct, Kate. It's a trap, because there's no such thing as too much humanity. There's no much thing as too much empathy. What there can be is too much sympathy. When I am so sympathetic to situations that I don't make good decisions, I don't set boundaries. But I would say, as in my leadership, I'm going to encourage all of you to say, I'm going to dive deeper. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a counselor, but I want to offer support to these people because their personal lives are impacting their work and vice versa. We have over the last 15 months gone through what many are calling the most turbulent emotional time in decades with the pandemic and everything else happening around the world. And what's happened is we're going to have even a greater mental health issue going forward. They're saying that the employees over the last 15 months have experienced emotional impact to the degree that they're going to be experiencing post-traumatic stress. So what are organizations going to do about that? What are you going to do about that? I can't be their counselor, but to me, if someone's spending 50% or more of their waking hours at work, whatever that means, why can't leadership and organizations be part of that solution? So I would encourage all of you, thank you for the question, Kate, to separate this idea that we can never be too human or too empathetic, but we need to be human, empathetic, and make good decisions, set those boundaries, and frankly, be willing to treat people differently. That's the hard one. Be willing to treat people differently because they're having different experiences.
Yep. And when it comes down to somebody bringing what you say, they're human, too much humanity into the office, maybe it's that they're just spending so much time talking about that because that's the only thing that's on their mind. And to Jeff's point, maybe we can seek additional resources because we're not caretakers in the sense of we are not professional counselors. But if we can provide some help for them, that may help them get back to a place where they're functioning well, which allows them to also be more effective workers. And that's the kind of impact we want to have.
And one key here, we're not going to talk a lot today about vulnerability. We talk a little bit in the trust piece around it, but this is where vulnerability is so vital. Because if your people are having these challenging experiences in their life and their perception is that you're not having them, then they feel like there's something wrong with them. And they also, as we'll talk about in trust, they may not trust you as much because they say, come on, we know there's stuff going on in your life. Are you not a human? And that vulnerability is part of humanizing your leadership.
So an example of that would be, as you're going into a meeting, you can have a check-in. So a check-in is one of the things that Jeff and I like to do in our meetings that allows people time to talk about what's going on with them that may be either a distraction, something that may be a big win, as well as something that could be really, really heavy on their hearts. Maybe they lost their dog, or they have a family member that's sick. Maybe they just, won the lottery, whatever it is that goes on. Having that little bit of time in a meeting for a check-in allows them to become present during the meeting, which means that they're going to be listening more, contributing more, and the meeting is going to be more powerful and impactful.
And when we make time for our people feel seen, heard, valued, and human. That's the simplest truth. I mean, we could stop right there, honestly. When we make time for our people and we are present with them, they feel seen, valued, heard, and that they matter and that they're human. And if we don't make time for them, then we have the opposite.
Yep. And it really comes back to caring for our people. Now, a few things that we've talked about is we need to spend time with them. Second, we need to listen to what's going on with them. Third, I'd say is that we just need to be curious about them. If you're not really curious about your people, you might be in the wrong kind of role. If you're in a leadership role where your primary function is working with people and making sure that they're okay, and that's not something that you want to do, consider another option. Sometimes there's management tracks versus technical tracks in different companies. My dad was a perfect example. He was a top designer at IBM, an engineer. And when he had the opportunity to move up, he tried management and he's like, no, I would rather work with stuff than people. So he did not continue on his management journey, and probably a good thing. So there's the curiosity about people. If you're not curious about them, then you're not going to be asking the questions. You're not going to want to find out what's really going on with them.
Well, and this may seem like an unusual place to put this topic. I'm a big believer in questions, the power of questions, and questions are a vital tool for leaders. And most people are not good at questions because they take extra work, they take extra time, they take extra thought. But interestingly enough, if you constantly are telling people things, telling them what to do, telling them how to do it, telling them what they're doing wrong, rarely telling them what they did right, by the way, that's another piece we'll get to in feedback. But when we ask people questions, questions actually are a form of demonstrating caring. If they are open-ended questions, I care about your perspective. I care about how you see this because it might be differently than how I see it. Versus me telling you, hey, this is how I see it. Do you see it differently? That's not really a question. That means it feels like a question, but that's not. That's a confrontational conversation. But if we start and lead with questions, that actually communicates to people that we care about them as people and as key parts of this team.
So, if I were to ask the question, hey, Jeff, are you stupid or did you just not know what to do here?
Right.
I mean,
those are the obvious ones.
It sounds like a question, right?
Well, you screwed up, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Or this one, hey, you know what? Let's talk about how badly you screwed up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
That's not really what we're talking about here.
No, we want to we want to respect the other individual, and we want to make sure that they actually know that we care. There's several pieces that we can do there. Now, one of the things is Jeff just talked about questions. When you ask a question, what do you think we should do? We should probably listen to that question, listen to their answer, and not just so that we can ask another question or make a point or something like that. We want to get present. And to be present is the best gift that we can offer them. That means that they are the most important person in the world to us in that moment.
And we're not going to go deep into presence today because we've got podcast episodes on it. It's part of our course. We spend a lot of time on presence. But here's this quick thing on presence I want you all to hear. Those of you who can see the screen, taking my technology and setting it aside does not make me present. It just makes me less distracted.
Right.
It makes me less obnoxious because this is obnoxious if I'm on this. And I'm going to tell you something. If you were to ask people around you to call you out every time that you're not present for them, you're in for an eye opener.
Yeah.
Because you think you're present, but you're not. Because if my phone's over here and I'm talking to Craig, but I'm thinking about what I need to do next, if I'm even thinking about what I need to say next, what's on my to-do list, I'm not present. And if we could take one skill, if I could take one skill and say, if you got this one down, everything else falls around it, it would be presence. Because when you're present, you listen, you demonstrate vulnerability. To be present, you must be vulnerable. There's a whole nother story. All the things that we're talking about, how you humanize your relationships at work and invite people in to this relationship, to the team, starts and finishes with presence.
Yep. And one other thing that we'll talk about here is that we want to provide grace, not judgment. So when somebody is going through a situation, maybe they didn't get something done in time, oftentimes we just jump right to let's hold them accountable. Let's impose some external force of some way. And we're judging them thinking, okay, this person is incompetent, this person, whatever it is, rather than finding out what's really going on and possibly giving them some grace and saying, you know what, I'm sorry that you're going through that right now. What can we do to support you? And let's talk about how we as a team can make sure that the job gets done even while you're going through this issue. So I want to finish off here with one quote by Simon Sinek. You want to read that, Jeff?
Yeah, trust isn't formed in meeting rooms or on conference calls. It's built when we're able to connect on a personal level outside our normal work obligations. It's crucial that we create spaces, virtual or in person, that are dedicated to simply spending time together. And we know this isn't happening enough. And when we talk to companies, often their answer is, well, yeah, we do an annual gathering. Wow. So we're so committed to relationships that we do it once a year.
Right.
Time for a change.
Yeah. And I'll say, it sounds really weird, but the ping pong table, the foosball table, those are actually times to connect with people. So it doesn't seem like it's so far out. I had a foosball table put into the engineering company that I worked for. And we would go in there, and my team and I would go in there and play, but we were also connecting at that same point. And then we would come out and, play other people. So we got to know other people in the company as well. Of course, we crushed them, but that was beside the point.
Are we going to do
So let's move on to one. Oh, yeah. Yes, let's do that.
All right. We have some great questions in the chat here. One from Sarah. She's asking, when does displaying vulnerability cross the line and is considered no longer professional?
My blunt response to that, to all of you, is that that's based upon how we define these. And many leaders have defined it that way to say you can be too vulnerable. And it's interesting because I'll tell you a quick story. Somebody I was coaching with years ago had gone through a very emotional year. She had nursed her father to his death. He was dying all year. And I said to her, well, how has that shown up for your team? And she said, they haven't seen any of that.
Oh.
And I said, well, why not? And here's what she said, quote, what do you expect me to do? Lay on the floor and bawl my eyes out? Now, that's not at all what I was suggesting. She said, that's what I do at night. I said, well, that's not what I'm suggesting. But I said, what might your team think if they've not seen emotion from you over the dying and death of your father? And she said, oh my God, they might conclude I'm cold, heartless, uncaring, didn't love my father. So the thing is, vulnerability is so terrifying that we typically amp up what it is. And in that version of unprofessional, say, I'm not going to do that. In fact, I can argue that we need to take emotion out of vulnerability because it's less about emotion and it's just more about being real and allowing our humanness to show. In fact, my new book I'm working on, there's a whole chapter on what vulnerability is, and it's only about 5% is about emotions. The rest is things like admitting you made a mistake, acknowledging you don't have all the answers, using questions instead of statements. So vulnerability, I would say that vulnerability is not the issue it's not professional or unprofessional. There's some discernment, but this is kind of like what we said earlier with saying that bringing your personal lives to work is drama. Well, you can't have drama at work, therefore no personal lives. I think we have to redefine what vulnerability is. It's just being human.
And we do have a few podcast episodes specifically on vulnerability. I would also suggest looking at the one with Larry English. We have a few others I'm not thinking of on top of my head. It's also in our course, Become a Confident Leader.
All right. Pramada asked, how do you find a balance between being productive and being human?
Well, I think it comes back to what is your end goal? Is it just to hit your numbers, or is it also to have an impact on the people around you? There's a balance between it, but what we need to realize is the more time we spend with people, the more the work gets done through them. The more that we help them to grow, the less work we have to do because they're able to take on a lot of that work. They want to grow too. They want to increase their responsibility, get a promotion, those types of things. And the more that we can help them grow, the more that's potential for them. But as they're growing, we can give them assignments that actually takes work off of our hands as well.
Well, and I would also add, this is like so many things. The question assumes that those are mutually exclusive.
Right.
That's an assumption in that. And I don't believe that's true at all. In fact, I believe that the humanness enhances productivity, because we believe, and
Yes.
that's the trap. I'm productive right here doing my stuff. So if I stop doing my work and go manage this person, lead this person, be present for this person, I'm no longer productive. But that is not true. And we know it's not true if we just think to that next step. So the humanization piece, having people who care about each other, who have each other's back, I guarantee you that organization is more productive than any organization that has worked on efficiencies. They work together, they dance together. That's what we need to learn to see in our leadership.
And kind of going off of that, Sophia asks if there's some examples of boundaries with humanity.
Examples of boundaries. Well, I would say, let me just say it this way. I would say the thing that comes up for me is understanding what it means to just hold space for people. Because we don't have to worry about boundaries in space. If someone comes to me who's part of my team and they're struggling with something personally, and they want to share about it, and I just listen to them. I don't try and solve it. I just listen. I'm present. That's human. That's me being human, and they're bringing their humanity. And together, this is a human experience. Why does that need a boundary? So I guess I would ask, where do we see the boundary being an issue? Where does humanity or even vulnerability become something that needs a boundary? Now, I will say this real quick. And this is a dangerous comment, and I call it out when I hear it, because I hear it pretty regularly. Someone says, "Oh, you want me to be authentic?" Or no, they'll say, "You don't want me to be authentic." Excuse my language. They say, "I'm an asshole if I'm authentic." That's not authenticity. That is not vulnerability. That's preying on people. That's manipulation. That's saying, I'm going to be vulnerable and authentic. I get to rage on you because I'm naturally a rager. That is not human. So we have to look at these things together. And when we put them all together and understand they're not this and this and this, they work like this, it's easier to see that we don't need a lot of boundaries. And when we do, we just create beyond boundaries for ourselves. We create boundaries for ourselves.
Yep.
Yeah,
I would say that aspect, hold on. So I think that aspect would be just a matter of, does that person understand that they have the potential to control their emotional outbursts? Because those are the things that when we learn, we have emotional intelligence, which helps us to understand how we show up, but we can also have emotional control. What's the term that you use, Jeff, for that?
Emotional control? Well, I just look at it as impact awareness.
Okay. But that's where we would actually be able to not rage on somebody else, but to control our emotions and be more decent to people.
Hey, Matt, I want to make sure, because Aaron asked a really important question that needs to be talked about. Aaron asked the question, says, "I'm loving what you're saying about humanizing leadership, but as a woman in a male-dominated industry, it feels impossible to incorporate without coming across as weak." I in no way, or Craig, or I want to dismiss that difference, and it's real, Aaron. I mean, you know it, and I, as that white male in the work environment, is starting to take responsibility for the ways I've contributed to that. Brene Brown said it brilliantly. She said that vulnerability is the greatest measure of courage. And what we know is that there's a story, and the story was perpetrated by men, frankly, that said that vulnerability is weak. Women in general did not create that story, because when that became a weakness, when vulnerability was labeled as weak, men were running things in dramatic ways. So there's an ongoing story about that. And there will be people who perceive you as weak. However, this is my offer to you, Aaron, and everyone, women and men. It is a risk to be vulnerable. Think of the word, that's what it involves. But that's what leadership is about. And I am not being naive here. What I'm saying is each one of us has to make a decision. How are we going to be as a leader? And we get to choose a course. And what's unfortunate, I see, Aaron, is that often as an observer, I'm the observer here, that I see too often women say, I'm going to lead like men because that's how you get ahead. And the organization may tell you that. And it's such a cost for our culture. It's such a cost for our teams and
Absolutely.
organizations. And I guess what I would say to men is you have an opportunity as a leader to be an ally and to model that vulnerability as well. So it's not just, the women who are doing this, because everybody has the ability to be vulnerable. That this is the difference, I believe. Men are terrified generally of being vulnerable because there's a message, a cultural story that says that's weak. I think it's a lie, but it's a cultural story. Women are generally not labeled as weak for being vulnerable, but what they're labeled at is not being as strong as the man who's not vulnerable. So this is a complex topic. We could talk about power differentials. We could talk about, which needs to be a conversation as well. I guess what I would offer is we all have that moment. We have to decide how we're going to lead. And there may be people who don't support us in that. That is the reality of the world today.
Yeah.
Jeff, thank you for addressing that question. I'm gonna, let's see. So
we have time for one more question here.
One more? Okay. Let's see. There's one I really wanted to pull out here. How can you start a culture of change in an organization to a more empathetic or personal culture?
I think a big part of that is starting, you have to lead the charge. And so if you're in a meeting and you're now starting with, let's do a check-in. And during that check-in, you go first and you say, you know what, I've been having some issues, whatever it is, I've had a tough time with kids getting homework done during COVID. And that's been something that's really been impacting us. And, we're still trying to figure that out. If any of you have any suggestions for that, I would love to know. That would be a type of check-in where you're leading the charge. You now went to a personal space rather than just talking about stuff that's happening at work. Just by doing that, you're now opening the door for other people to start sharing on that level.
Yeah, I'm all into that. It's too often we're waiting for culture change to happen from the top. Yep. That would be great, but almost everything everything we're talking about today are choices you can make to start modeling that today.
Absolutely.
And look to see that you'll see an improvement, and with a hope expectation that others will see it and start following, and that will become the culture. It doesn't have to be dictated culture. It can be inside out culture change.
And what we'll see is when you start making those shifts in your team, other people outside of your team are going to start noticing. And especially as people move around an organization, they may carry some of those thoughts into the rest of the organization. You can be infectious in a positive way by doing that. All right. Our next topic here is we're going to be talking about trust. Now, trust is a very important aspect of leadership. I'd say probably the foundation, because when we talk about vulnerability, you don't just become vulnerable. You don't share everything if there's no trust, unless you were the one leading that and trying to build that to begin with. And so if you're in an environment where, let's just say, going into a meeting where you really don't trust the other people around you, are you going to share something that may make you uncomfortable about whether you were competent in the things that you were doing, for example? Typically, no, you're not going to share that because you don't want to be called out as, wow, that was a stupid idea, Craig, or whatever that is.
Well, and this trust is such a, trust is a simple concept, but it's really complex because we know whether we trust or not, right? We know that, but how that happens and what it's based around, because we tend to think about trust as a very high level question. Like if I said, do you trust the people you work with? Your gut response is probably yes, for two reasons. One is you go, well, yeah, isn't that what I'm supposed to do? I certainly am supposed to trust them. And you're thinking about a high level. Do I trust that they're not going to directly lie to me? Do I trust they're not going to steal from me? Things like that. Well, unfortunately, that's not always true. But we don't get into the question of, do I trust that that person has my back? Do I trust that they care about me? Do I trust that when they give me feedback, it's really about me getting better? Do I trust that they see me? Do I trust that I can speak up? Do I trust that I can try something new and make a mistake and learn and it's okay? This is the kind of trust that leadership is about. And my belief is that trust is the thing that is the most terrifying conversation, because we want to believe there's trust, because if there's not, it's, oh my God, now what? We want to believe that we're trusted and we want to believe we're trustworthy. But ultimately, people decide if they trust us, and they trust us in layers, and they trust us situationally. And there's so many ways we break trust, and there's so many ways to build trust. And we've got to remember that we earn trust. You do not get trust with a position. You
Right.
get trust, you get some level of respect of the position. That's it. You got to earn trust, and you got to earn it every day and earn it intentionally.
Yep. And one of the shortcuts to that is what Larry English said. He said, vulnerability is the shortcut to trust. So when we were talking on the podcast, that was one of the phrases that he said. And it's like, wow, that just makes so much sense, because as we come in and we share who we are, that's essentially what the vulnerability is. Then other people are able to do the same thing. When we say, you know what, I'm really struggling doing this particular task, this one thing, I'm really not sure how to get this done. Hey, you're just now saying that you don't know how to do something. Wow, is that vulnerability, or is that now saying I don't know how to do my job? Well, when you say something like that, you're inviting help. And when we ask for help, that's actually a form of vulnerability.
It is. And how people and how positional leaders respond to that determines what happens with around trust.
Right.
Because if I do that and I get shut down and say, well, then if someone says, well, figure it out.
Yeah.
No one's going to speak up again.
Right.
That's the problem with trust. One of the things that we've talked about this before, I often do workshops on trust. And there's an exercise I do where I have everybody get in groups, and I say, now, why don't you make two lists? I want you to make a list of things that build trust and the things that break trust. And you get 5 or 6 minutes, and they get in a group and they start writing. And by the way, no one ever has a problem writing things down, right? They're like, few minutes, then I give them the trick question. I say, well, now, if it's in person, which it often is pre-COVID, stand up if you started with the list of things that break trust. It's 99.5% of the time. Everybody stands up. Everybody. It's when someone who doesn't, I go, wow, you're the unicorn. Why is that? Because we notice the things that break trust. We don't typically notice the things that build trust, and because the building trust list is short. The building trust list is don't do the things on the other list. That's the number one. Number two is some degree talking about demonstrate genuine caring, presence, vulnerability. Another is do what you say you're going to do.
Wow, really?
And the fourth is have your words and actions line up.
Yeah.
Because when you say one thing and do another, trust is gone. It's not just bent. It's not just bumped. It is gone because he said, you're not who you say you are. And someone had put some of the questions earlier about how important it is to look at the actions people are taking and what we show, because that's all that matters. It's like the old saying, it's decades old, I think, of your actions are speaking so loudly, I can't hear a word you're saying.
That's right.
That's what leadership is about, and being aware of that and paying attention to that and taking responsibility for that.
Yep. And oftentimes we think that trust is established in our organization. And yet, so we assume that it's there, but oftentimes we also think that it's better than it is. And how would we find out how the trust level is, Jeff?
Well, this is a bit of a problem. We ask our people.
What? No.
Well, but let's be honest with everybody here. The problem is if we haven't built trust, they're not going to tell us the truth.
Very good point.
So it may be, and this is so often leaders say, well, we don't have a trust issue because I asked everybody. But see, if they've got these 6 issues over here, what we've concluded is and discovered is that every issue in an organization, if it touches people at all, somewhere in there's a trust issue.
Yep.
And the companies have to be willing to take a look at trust. That's vulnerability, to be willing to say, you know what, I think we might have a trust issue. Let's take a look at it. And let's see if we can really get some robust feedback on whether or not we really are trustworthy. And to remember that trust, some people say it goes both ways. It does. But when upper level leaders are saying, I'm not sure I trust my people, they're asking the wrong question. The question is, do your people trust you? Because if your people trust you, you're likely going to trust them. And if you don't trust them, they probably don't trust you. And who goes first? Leaders go first.
Wow.
Leaders go first.
Yeah. It's also interesting. Everybody has kind of a default. If I step into a new situation, if I go to a new event, if I go to a new company, I step in and I can choose to trust by default or distrust by default or be neutral. And so think about yourself. Do you naturally show up as being the trusting kind of person, or starting with distrust, or are you kind of a wait and see kind of person? And that will tell you a little bit about yourself, but also think everybody else has their default too. Some people, we have to prove that we are trustworthy before they're going to trust us. Others will trust us until we show that we cannot be trusted.
And this is such a big one. And this is, look, I'm a natural truster. I trust first. I take about 30 seconds and I decide if I trust someone at a base level.
Yeah.
And they can lose that trust. Okay. And they can lose it depending on what their behavior is. And for example, for me, misalignment, where your actions don't line up with your words, that's a big breaker for me. That to me breaks trust as fast as just telling me a lie. Because in a form, it is a lie. It's an unconscious lie sometimes, but that's going to break trust. But the thing is, if you are someone who distrusts first, I'm not saying there's something wrong with that or you, but I will say it makes it more challenging to build trust, because basically you're saying to someone else, you have to go first. You have to earn my trust first. And so that to me conflicts with the idea of leaders going first.
Another thing that we want to think about in trust is that we need to actually listen to what people say and the questions that they ask, because those will help us to understand where they're coming from and help us to understand how they're perceiving things, whether they're trusting or not. So if you feel like people are asking too many questions about how to do something, you might be a micromanager.
Well, I'll tell you that whole micromanager thing is interesting, and I'm going to send you all to a source, so we're not going to dig into it deeply here. I'm almost done with listening to a book called The Motive by Patrick Lencioni, and there's a whole discussion in there about how people in leadership positions feel that coaching, mentoring, managing, building, and growing their people is a form of micromanagement. And therefore they don't do it. And so what they do is they go, I just let you run with it. And they don't help their people. They don't grow them. They don't coach them. And the word they used in there, it's a brilliant one. It's not delegation, it's abdication.
Yep. So when people ask, how do I deal with this interpersonal issue? They're not trusting. When people don't share their ideas or stop sharing their ideas, there's probably a trust issue. Because if they trust that they will be heard, they're much more likely to actually have a conversation about their idea. And what stifles innovation is not so much that you don't have smart people with great ideas. You may have smart people with great ideas, but no trust to be able to share those ideas. And therefore, the company hurts tremendously by not having those people sharing their ideas.
Well, and so some other examples of, symptoms of trust issues. When you sense that your people aren't speaking up,
Hmm.
and you're wondering why they're not contributing, and we want to blame them, and we get on them like, hey, come on, I need you to contribute more. There's possibly a trust issue there. They don't feel it's safe to speak up. They don't feel it's okay to speak up. Maybe they've been, whether it's there or in a prior employment situation, because we
Yeah.
all have what we call employment baggage from
Yep.
a prior situation. And we assume that when we hire people, they come in with a clean slate. No, they don't. They come with all the experiences and judgments and fears from prior situations.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that as we connect with people, let's say we just hired somebody and they're now joining our team or whatever that is, we're now creating a new relationship with somebody. At that point is a really good time to just find out where they're coming from and help to explain how you see things working, maybe set up your expectations and ask them what their expectations are. When we establish our expectations right up front, that is huge.
So
You also
another symptom is when you find that you feel like people are deferring to you.
Mm,
That's a trust issue. That's not because they respect your position. They're afraid to step on your toes. It could be they learned it before. They're not allowed to do that. But to some degree, they don't trust that it's okay to speak up, speak their mind, offer their ideas, to try new things.
yep. I think there's also an issue where when we see politics happening in a company, that's generally because there's a lack of trust. When you're politicking, that means that you're trying to make sure that your ideas are heard, because otherwise, that may not happen if in an untrusted environment. So you're trying to make sure that you look good versus looking bad. You have a cover your butt process to make sure that everything that you do, you're safe, because you're not trusting that if you mess up, you're still going to be employed, or that you're going to be able to do what you want to do in your career.
And I think there's so many things we could do here. We've spent, a few minutes relatively on trust. It's such a deep topic. The last symptom I would share with you about trust, and we'll talk more about some other resources, is it comes to feedback. And we're going to do feedback here at the end. But if you don't have rich feedback happening in your organization, one of the biggest reasons is trust.
Yeah.
And the further we move up in an organization, it's more difficult to get feedback, especially from the people who report to us using that organizational language. And too often our response goes like this: well, how are you doing? I'm doing great. Why do you think you're doing great? Well, I haven't heard otherwise. There's a trust issue because nobody's perfect. And if you're not getting ideas on how to improve, even, I call it the sharpening of the blade, then they don't feel safe giving you that feedback. So if you're not getting feedback regularly from everyone around you, it is a trust issue that needs to change.
Yep. And I will say, we dive into trust and what it's all about, how to build trust, some of the trust breakers. How do you do that in our course that we call Become a Confident Leader? This is something that we have offered as a discount in the past to BGS members. And for here, we've cut the price 50%. It's not quite as big of a discount as the last time, but we're at 50% there. And then also we have coaching, primarily with Jeff, and that's a 40% discount there. So you can get to that by going to go.cardivera.com/confidentbgs. That's also where we have the notes for this. So you can scroll to the bottom of the page. You'll be able to get your notes, also a resource guide that we have for you as well. So that's something where in the course, we're actually dealing a lot with the issues of accountability, of trust, the mindset behind leadership, some of the core tools that you need to have in your leadership toolbox. It's a pretty comprehensive course that Jeff and I would say is the foundation for good leadership. So Become a Confident Leader is a course that you can take a look at there.
All right, let's open up to some questions on trust.
Yeah.
Let's do some questions on trust before we jump to feedback.
All right. All right. From Roseanne here, she asked what techniques do you recommend for management to try and build trust or get management to recognize that they have not earned the trust of their teams?
Oh boy. I'm taking a breath before I answer this one, Roseanne. The first thing that comes to mind is to be willing to bring it into the conversation. Before you get into the techniques, I believe you have to be willing to use the word trust. And that's the scary part. And this is where it's really helpful to be modeled from someone in the position where they can be willing to talk about how something's impacting trust with them or with another person. Like accountability is a big one. It's a great way to look at accountability. I'm not going to do the whole accountability process here because we talk about a process that most of you have probably never seen. I rarely say that, but my guess is none of you have ever seen the accountability process we talk about. We have a podcast on it. I know some of that is in our course. But in accountability, when someone doesn't do what they said they're going to do, the impact every time is trust. Every time. But we don't talk about it. We say things like, well, do better next time. But if I'm willing to look at Craig and say, Craig, when you told me you'd get this to me today at 4 and you didn't, one of the impacts that is that I trust you less to do it next time. Now that's hard to hear.
It is.
That's hard because Craig wants to believe he's very trustworthy, but he doesn't understand that impacts trust, and he doesn't want to understand it in the way that we don't want to believe that what I do and say has an impact of trust. But that's the issue. So I would say the biggest thing to start with is the willingness to make trust, the word literally, part of the conversation in your organization. The techniques will follow the courage and vulnerability it takes to bring it into the discussion.
Yep. And you can use yourself as an example. I mean, you can call yourself out on the whole accountability thing and say, you know what? I said I was going to have this by this time. I have not gotten that down. And I know that has broken trust with you. I know that you don't believe that I can, that you can trust me on some of the next things if I haven't done this. My commitment to you is that I am going to get that done. And in the future, I am going to do my darndest to make sure that my word is my bond.
Love that. Yep. There you go. Leaders go first.
All right. Question from Christina. What happens when age is seen as a factor and an individual may not be as trusted to do tasks or projects because they're seen as younger or inexperienced?
What hits me when I see that is to ask a question back, Christina, which you can't answer here, but I'll just ask it rhetorically, is to ask whether or not, how much have you challenged that assumption? To have that direct conversation, and that direct conversation is where the vulnerability comes into place. To say, and what one way I might invite to have the conversation is to go to that person or group where you feel that you're being treated that way and say, look, I'm feeling like this. We use feeling words. Not I know this is true. I'm feeling like you don't trust me with these projects, and put trust in it. Because what you're now calling the task is, if they don't trust you, it's an opportunity to say that's true and why, and let's talk about how I can build that trust, or for them to recognize that's how they're communicating it to you, and to have now a conversation. If they say, no, that's not it at all, great. Well, then let's talk about what it is.
Yeah.
But your willingness, back to your willingness to be courageous and vulnerable, to bring that into the conversation, to test the assumption, and to frankly call them out in a respectful way. Call the conversation. That's what we call it. You're calling the conversation.
All right. Question from Kara here. She says that I have staff members who come to me with grievances that they have with senior leadership. How can I help navigate mending a broken trust between staff members and senior leadership?
Well, I would first probably go talk to senior leadership and see if they are aware that that trust has been broken. Find out from them, do you understand that this is the situation? If they do, ask them, are they open to repairing that and rebuilding trust? If they're not, that may be a situation where that type of company is not open to actually building the trust. But there's two levels of trust. You have with the senior management and you have within your team. And so I don't know if there is a mistrust within the team that you can resolve, and then not like putting yourself against the senior management, but as you show that you can build trust within your team, that may be something that spills over as well.
Well, and I want to say to everybody, it's easy for Craig and I to sit here and tell you ideas on ways to approach it, but I would never say to you that this is easy.
No,
these are difficult conversations because they are not the conversations we're having every day. You may be creating a conversation that's literally never been had in the organization.
Yep.
When you're talking about trust, we talk around trust. And I will also say this, though, back to what is leadership. It's a moment of making a choice to help move things forward. And you may decide not to bring it up, but just be aware that you are. And what's the impact of not bringing it up? What's the risk of not bringing it up? Because to your question, and I forget who asked it, we don't know if senior leadership is open to it. I think it is helpful if you can be the bridge. And here's the word I want to offer to all of you. Craig and I have used it a lot. This is a vital one in trust. Start using the word impact, because that's a way to find out if people, it's not about opinions anymore, it's about impact. So we can say, there's an impact that's happened. So for example, if you go to senior leadership and said, I want to make you aware of an impact that's happening in the organization. Some of the team members have some challenges in trusting senior leadership. And some of the things that are having that impact, instead of creating it, back to some of the things that are having that impact are. Yeah. When we talk about this, here's one that's going on right now. When the organization made a decision at senior leadership about what remote work was going to look like in the future without talking to anybody on the team. I don't trust you now, because you've basically said, my opinion doesn't matter. You're going to decide what's best for the organization and me without even input. That has trust implications.
All right. From Jonathan here, he says that I work in an organization which every year in an annual survey scores extremely low on a question regarding whether or not the most qualified candidates are promoted. Seems to stem from HR not selecting the most qualified to move forward in the hiring process. How can this be addressed effectively?
Is it clear what the advancement requirements are? And when they say, the most qualified, is that clearly identified so that everybody can have the same metric to go by?
Yeah, I think that's a big one. We talk a lot about the importance of creating clear expectations. Many organizations do well with what it takes to get promoted. And then I'd also say, if you are one of those candidates that feel like you're not being promoted, to be willing to have that conversation, to ask for that feedback. We'll talk in moments some more about feedback, but what I tell folks is, if you're not getting the feedback you want and feel like you deserve, which you all deserve feedback, by the way.
Yes.
Of what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, and what you can improve and how to improve it. It's vital. That's what we need to do. We need to help grow our people. If you're not getting it, ask. If you're still not getting it, ask. If you still don't get it, ask. If you get to the point that if you ask one more time, it's obnoxious, ask. Because only then will you know who they really are as an organization. And if they're telling you, we're not going to give that to you, now you can make a decision about whether you want to be part of that organization, because you've now done everything you can that you control to ask for what you want. And if they're unwilling or unable to give it, now you just make a decision.
And you could have a situation where you have a manager that's just not providing feedback. Maybe go above their heads. Just depends on your situation. Again, we don't know your whole situation, but consider other sources for getting feedback. Maybe it's team members. Maybe it's somebody that's lateral to your boss, somebody else who has seen your performance and can provide some feedback on it. But anyway, let's actually jump into feedback and talk about what that looks like and how we can build that into our organizations. So feedback really is a gift. It's something where we are telling somebody a truth, our truth of how we see them. And it's also how they see us. And that gift of feedback is so important. When we look at this, it's just about how can we both tell the other person how they're doing, good or bad, and vice versa, find out how we're coming across, the kinds of impact that we're having on them, so that we really understand what it is that we're doing and how effective we're being in having an impact on others.
And where we're going to start off here with feedback is to talk about what we call the trouble with feedback.
Yeah.
And I want to tell a quick example. When I'm in person at events, coming soon, back to live. When we're talking about feedback, I will often ask for a volunteer, and I will then proceed to give them some feedback. I've never met them before, and it will go something like this. I'll do the short version. Let's say it's Craig. I will say, Craig, I just want to let you know that I really appreciate the way you just led that meeting. And not only do I think you did a great job, but what I particularly liked about how you did that meeting was that they started to get off course, and you caught it, and you were willing to step in, and you brought it back in a good way, which kept us focused. It allowed us to stay on course. It's a great model for future meetings. And you also demonstrated courage, because some people are hesitant to speak up, and you made it so safe for others to speak up and do the same going forward. So what you did in that meeting just now not only was good for you, but it was great for the team and makes us a better organization. And when I do that, I will then say to that person, how does that feel? Some people have actually cried, and it was made up. People have told me, I've never gotten feedback like that in my entire career. The best I've ever gotten is great job. Feedback is about telling someone that you see them, that you believe in them. Now, in that case, it was what they did really well, and being really specific that says, I'm paying attention. I want to see the impact you're creating. Telling someone and giving someone an attaboy or an attagirl, that's not really feedback. And it also points out that feedback is telling people what we see. We think that feedback is always negative. It's always constructive. And it's not. It's just about seeing people and saying, I'm taking the time to notice, and I'm going to help you grow because I care about you. And that is really something that is so simple, but we are missing the boat. In fact, we're missing it so much. I had someone walk up to me a couple of years ago and said, I think we need to stop using the word feedback. It is so tainted, it is non-recoverable. That to me is absurd and frightening, to think that a word is tainted because people hate it so much.
I mean, when it comes down to it, we have the ability to bless or curse with our words. And when we think about it that way, when we're coming to somebody and saying, wow, Jeff, I really appreciate what you've done here. It's really made a difference for the team, et cetera, versus, hey, Jeff, that was a great job. Now, we also have the other side of things. Jeff, you really sucked on that last project. It tanked, there were all these things going on with it. I don't know what you were thinking. That's a form of feedback. Not an effective form of feedback.
I would actually say that's not feedback. Let's just take it out of the definition. That's just dumping on. That's not feedback.
That's dumping.
Because
You're right.
feedback is designed to help people get better. That in no way is designed to help people get better unless you're leading from a place of fear. And I want them so afraid to have that attack again, they won't do it again. That is not leadership. That is not feedback. And I would tell a leader that to their face. I said, you're failing as a leader if that's how you're approaching people.
Yep.
The problem is that's probably how they were led.
Yeah. I wonder if anybody in the audience has actually experienced that type of dumping as well. I would be surprised if not. The other side of that is I can come back and say, you know what, Jeff, I would love to to talk about the project that we were just working on. I'd love to get your feedback on that.
Yeah, it's well, it's really an invitation to the conversation. And one of the things I'll throw in here now is we don't open feedback well. And one of the things that I have started doing, I don't know where it came from. I just started doing it. I find myself doing it to the point of being obnoxious sometimes, not in a good way, obnoxious. I always ask permission to give people feedback.
Yeah.
I always say, it's almost the exact same words. It's a script. Are you open to some feedback? I ask friends that. I ask colleagues that. I ask team members that. And here's the thing. It's okay for my team members to say, I'm not really open right now. It could be that the situation has a lot of energy around it. Maybe they're distracted. Maybe they're feeling like they're already beating themselves up or feeling bad about what they did or didn't. And if they say, you know what, I'm not open right now, I say, well, you know what, I get that. Because I do expect my team members to be open at some point to say, you know what, let's make sure it happens in the next 24 hours. It's really important that feedback happens. We call it on the fly. Giving someone feedback 2 weeks later is useless. Giving feedback 3 days later is often useless because no one remembers the nuances of it. The nuances are where we really learn. And it's not a label. It's not a judgment that you did good or bad. It's let's talk about what you did well. Let's use questions in that. And I'll close this thought out with this. I'm so tired of hearing this. And this is one of the issues with feedback. We'll say, well, we don't want it to be personal. We don't want it to be personal. But here's the thing. The best feedback I've ever gotten in my life was really personal because it landed, and it wasn't the way it was said, but it was really hard to hear that that's my issue. Like if I'm saying to Craig, when you did that, my trust in you is lower. If Craig doesn't give a shit about that, I'm worried about it now.
Yeah.
But it's not about the judgments of people. It's just a perception of them. So what I say to this is I can prove to you all, and I can't see your faces. I can prove to you that feedback is personal. And here's how. Because I know every one of you at some point in your career has said it or had said to you multiple times, hey, don't take this personally. Don't take this personally, but here's the thing. Have you ever said to someone, don't take this personally, and then praise them? Have you ever said what I just said to Craig? Would you say that and at the end say, hey, by the way, don't take this personally? No, when we're giving that so-called constructive or critical feedback is when we say, don't take it personally, which is about me. I don't want you to be mad at me. So don't take it personally. No, and we're going to learn to give feedback in different ways, which we'll talk some more about. But it is personal because I care enough about you as a person to give you a perspective that maybe you can't see yourself, to help you grow and be better. What's more personal than that?
Yep. And I think the other key, we mentioned this earlier, is setting expectations. Because when we start off, whatever our relationship is with that person that's coming in, let's say it's somebody that's working for us. And when we first hire them in, do we actually spend some time with them, getting to know them, getting to understand maybe some of the leadership baggage that they've brought with them and expectations, mistrust, whatever that is? And are we clear about what the expectations of the job is? Now, we've gone through a hiring process. That doesn't mean that they know exactly what's in our minds. We have to be really clear about what our expectations are, and vice versa. We want to, I would suggest, as a quality leader, you want to find out what their expectations of you and the work environment are, so that you can make sure that you're meeting their needs as well.
I'm going to jump in here, Craig, and answer one of the questions. I'm glad Sophia asked this.
Yeah.
She asked our thoughts about the sandwich method of feedback. This probably won't surprise you. I am not a fan. I'm not a fan at all because it's a made up concept.
Yes.
Based upon we don't have enough trust to give our honest perspectives to someone. So we're going to dress it up. And the way I like to tell the story is that imagine you've got this really rank piece of meat. This meat, it was great roast beef when you got it 3 weeks ago. It's been sitting on the counter for 3 weeks. But you know what? I've got some amazing sourdough bread that is fresh out of the oven. And I'm going to take that fresh sourdough bread and I'm going to put that rancid meat in the middle, and I'm going to put on, I like saucy sandwiches. I'm going to put some mayo and mustard and maybe some pickle and tomato. That sandwich is still not a good sandwich. We created the sandwich model because we were afraid to have the honest conversations. And I believe we were lazy and didn't want to learn good ways to deliver feedback, which, by the way, here's a whole other topic, using questions instead of statements. If your feedback method is statements, there's an opportunity to acquire a technique of using questions for feedback. Yeah, you can tell, not a fan of the sandwich method.
The rancid sandwich. Yeah, good point. So there are a couple different types of feedback, and we've mentioned them a little bit, but there's helpful and not helpful. And helpful would be something like catching people doing something good. Now, when we give feedback on that, like Jeff gave to me about whatever it was that I did in that environment and handling the questions and so forth, that was something that was done really, really well. We catch somebody doing something good and we tell them that in the detail and we tell them the impact that it's had. What do you think is going to happen? Are they going to absolutely not do that again? Or do you think they're going to try to repeat that and make sure that they're doing the same type of thing? I think it's obvious. The other thing that says is really important, that Jeff mentioned this earlier. They now know that you're watching, that you're paying attention, that you care.
Another piece of helpful feedback, and this gets back somewhat to emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, and emotional control. And the word we use is energized. Giving feedback that's unenergized. And we use the word unenergized because so often someone will say, well, my boss gave me this feedback. He or she was really angry. And the boss might say, I wasn't angry. I was frustrated. Well, it doesn't matter what he or she was, but there was energy to it. We don't listen well to energy. In fact, I should say we actually listen to energy really well, but we don't listen to the feedback. So for whatever reason, you are feeling energy in your body. You don't have to figure out if you're mad, sad, glad, scared, frustrated, whatever it is, stressed, it doesn't matter. But if you're feeling that energy, it is not the time to give feedback, especially critical feedback, because that person is most likely going to hear the energy and be defending themselves against the energy versus being open to receiving that perspective, that information, which is the feedback.
Yep. So good. Now, some of the things that we do is when we are respectful to them about their time. We don't want to go through a big feedback session if they're just running out the door. We want to make sure that we're setting aside time for quality feedback. And I would say, even for the good stuff, because if we're just going in and saying, hey, job well done and so forth, we want to make sure that they're in a place that they can receive that well. And I will say, oftentimes when we compliment or say something good about somebody, they're quick to dismiss it. Do not allow that. If I come into you, Jeff, let's just role model this. Jeff, you have done a phenomenal job of curating people for our podcast. It has really had an impact on our listenership because of the quality of the people that have been there. Way to go.
Yeah. Well, no, thanks. It's fine. I like doing it. I'm glad it's all worked out.
Jeff, you're not hearing me. What I'm saying is you are having a big impact. I want you to actually pull that in. I want you to understand that, and feel how good that is, because you have done a tremendous job. Now, if we allow them to just dismiss it, it's not going to sink in. Oftentimes, a lot of people do not have the confidence or self-esteem to actually be able to take in the good stuff. That's something where we can have a major impact on them in their lives by helping them to receive it.
Yeah, and in fact, to add to that, a process that we talk about, we're not going to talk about it today. We just don't have time. In fact, if you're curious, gosh, what's the easiest way to reach out for a follow-up? I've written some things on something called a feedback loop, and a feedback loop is a process around feedback. And in it, one of the questions is to start with, it's all questions except when they're done. And the first question is, tell me what you did really well. And invariably, most people don't answer it. They'll say, well, I did a couple things, but let me tell you what I did wrong. And I will not let them go. They said, no, 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 wait, I need you to tell me all the things you did well. We'll get to that eventually. Part of it's training. I think we've been culturized to believe that we're supposed to identify what we screwed up more than what we did well. And as a result, we walk around basically beating ourselves up, never seeing what we did well. And we grow by learning from the things we could do better, but we also learn from realizing how often we got it right.
Yep. So good. Let's see, saying to somebody that you disappointed me, Jeff, you disappointed me. That's horrible. There's also judgment. We talked about that a little bit before, but when we're judging them and saying, basically they're incompetent, they have this, whatever it is, we haven't listened to their side of the story. And we need to do that. We need to understand where they're coming from. Maybe they just maybe they just lost one of their parents or something like that. We don't know until we ask. Yes, that's going to have an impact on their performance, don't you think? Because they're human. And again, we want to humanize the work environment. It's not to say that we allow a long-term not getting the job done, right? But we can be there to support them during the process. So let's turn it over to questions. Are we ready for that, Jeff?
Absolutely, absolutely. We could go on for 4 hours on feedback.
Yeah, or they could just go to the course for that part.
All right, so I have a question here. It says, if you missed the opportunity to give real-time feedback, what's the best way to loop back around?
I would say actually just to go back to it. I think the question is a good reminder how important it is to do close to real time, or what we call on the fly, because that's when it's most rich. That's when we can get into those nuances. But if you miss the window, I said, still go back. I think what happens is if we miss the window, then we tend to not do it. And please do not save it for the annual review.
In fact, annual review, there should be nothing surprising in the annual review.
I can't tell you how many people have said to me, I'm frustrated with annual reviews because in the annual review, they brought something up that happened 8 months ago. And the reason they did it is because I'll be blunt, someone has told them, maybe in HR, has told them, you need to have some specific examples. That's the only one they have. Even though it was dealt with, it shows up in their annual review. What does that person think? They're never letting me off the mat.
Yeah.
I have some questions previously from like the trust section that we talked about that we haven't gone through yet. Do you mind if we go through a couple of those?
Sure. Bring it on.
All right. All right. So Kimberly asked, let's say you can't do what you said you were going to do, and maybe you're wrong, or maybe your intentions didn't work out. What's the best way to change the plan without impacting trust?
Identify it as soon as possible, communicate it openly and honestly, take responsibility for it, talk to the impact that this change may have created or likely created, including on trust, and make a clear commitment to do better in the future and to follow up that, demonstrating that commitment. Most people say, I want to do better, but they don't. And here's going to be a weird one for you. Resist, for everybody, resist the urge to apologize. Now, let me tell you why. Apologies are not bad. However, apologies are generally about the person who didn't honor the commitment. I want to, hey, I'm sorry I didn't get this done, because I want you to say, don't worry about it. It's okay. But what you're really saying is we're okay. And what I think you're saying is, I still trust you, but I may not. And so I've often made the bold statement that leaders don't apologize. What they do is they actually change. And when people say, what do you mean they don't apologize? Someone never apologizes. I said, which are you more tired of? Someone not apologizing or someone apologizing and not changing? And they go, oh, yeah, that one. Apologizing and not changing.
Yep.
All right. Here's one from Jeffrey. Being able to hold space or be there for someone. We have to have built up some internal resources to do so. What are some things that you do to develop yourselves personally?
That is
Jeff,
such a good question, Jeffrey.
Yeah. Jeff and I are big time into personal development as well. We believe that you can't grow your business bigger than you are. You can't grow your career bigger than you are. Basically, if you're not growing, the rest of your life isn't going to grow. And so there are a lot of different things that we do. I will say the biggest thing that has had an impact on me in the last year has been our podcast, because we're interviewing some fantastic people and coming up with a lot of views that I hadn't thought of before. So just immersing yourself into something that maybe you're not as familiar with, like, for example, diversity and inclusion. I didn't know much about it before we started podcasting, and now it's a big part of what we talk about.
And what I would offer, Jeffrey, is all internal change starts with awareness.
Yeah.
Starts with awareness. So start with these two awarenesses that virtually all of us have because of our human experience. One is that when we're in a challenging emotional situation, our default is to comfort. Because that whatever they're going through is uncomfortable. So we want us to be comfortable. So we're going to say things like, don't worry, it's going to be okay. We're going to try and minimize their emotion because we're uncomfortable with it. So be aware of our desire to comfort, because comfort's not bad, but it's not the same as holding space. Secondly, be aware that our natural inclination is to solve. And many times there's nothing to solve. What holding space means, I'm going to experience you. I'm going to see you. I'm going to value you. I'm going to be present for you. And I'm not going to judge you. I'm just going to listen to you. And I will only offer input if you ask for it. And if I've got something compelling, I will ask permission, say, hey, are you open to some feedback on this? And here's the other thing, be aware of that we do culturally. We often take over those conversations. What I've heard you said in there, Jeffrey, have I had an experience? I'll tell the experience really quickly. It happened almost 41 years ago, September 1980. My younger brother was killed in a tragic accident, 19 years old. And there were lots of people at his viewing because he was a popular athlete, popular student. My dad was known. Thousands of people came to the viewing. And I was pissed off. My brother has died. And what I was pissed off is all the people who came up to me and said, I know how you feel. Let me tell you about when my brother or sister or father or something died. You know what? I don't want to hear about your story. You don't know how I feel, because no one can know how someone else feels. And for 40 years, I've been living with that. And I started writing about it, and people came out of the woodwork and said, that infuriates me when people want to take over my story.
Yeah.
Let them have their story. Let them have their moment, and be aware of the inclination we have to take it over. With the awareness, you can catch yourself and just be there for them. That's what holding space is.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully we answered that question.
All right, I have a question from Kimberly. It says, some teams say that sharing space, team building, is not the work they came here to do. How do you encourage them to participate?
Wow. Well, I mean, a big part of that is you need to help them understand the value of being part of a team, that they may be there to be an individual contributor, but the team itself has to get the job done. And if there's not communication across, if people are not trusting each other, then it doesn't go as well. So it makes it more effective for everybody in there, which means that every participant in that team, as the team does well, each one of them is more promotable.
Yeah. And then the piece I would add is just and this is a direct conversation, to point out to that person, yeah, I get that, but you know what? The team needs that interaction with you.
Yep.
This is not just about you. When you're not a part of that, you may say, I'm fine not having that with others, but they're not. So it goes from an I conversation to a we conversation.
And
And that's
ultimately,
what builds great teams.
yep. And if they don't want to be, involved in the team side, then you may have to question, is this the right kind of person for your team? Because ultimately you're looking for people who can work well together. And if they're going to be an isolated person, an individual contributor rather than a team contributor, that may negatively impact your team and your organization. So we're actually at time. I understand if people need to leave, I'm going to need to jump off. Jeff, I don't know if you have extra time for Q&A.
I don't have a ton, but do you want to do a wrap on the course and thank
sure.
everybody?
Yep. So I appreciate everybody being here. We certainly, this is something that Jeff and I love talking about. And this is also something that we have built a business around. Jeff and I have known each other for several years. A couple of years ago, we decided that, hey, we ought to join forces. And so we've been building a lot of content, doing a lot of webinars, and also built this course, Become a Confident Leader. We have the coaching, we have the course itself, which is a 6-module course over 6 weeks. And we also have a coaching program that helps you to basically put a mirror up to you and say, hey, who are you? How can you improve on who you are and the things that you do? Maybe Jeff, you can talk a little bit more about the coaching side.
Well, the coaching is really about, the simplest way to talk about coaching is none of us know, we all have situations we don't know what we don't know. And the metaphor I'd leave with you is that most of us think we're running a 100-yard dash. And we actually believe that. But the truth is we're actually running a hurdle, and typically a high hurdle. And those hurdles are hurdles that we put there. So the coaching for me is often to help people first of all, let them see the hurdles, lower the hurdles, and in some cases eliminate the hurdles, and to give them tools so that they actually more often than not are running that 100-yard dash than running that high hurdle that they're not trained for and they didn't even see it coming.
Yeah, so good. Well, it's interesting because a lot of the conversations we've had really goes back to our tagline: grow your people, grow your business, and grow your life. Those are the 3 things that we really focus on in Cardavera, and what Jeff and I are passionate about.
Well, I'm guessing you came away with that today. Craig and I are both passionate about this topic. We both believe that there are so many opportunities for people to step up into their leadership everywhere, around their organization, around their communities, around their families, around everything, to do the work on the inside and gather the external tools so they can be more effective and impactful in how they show up to help change people's lives. That's what leadership is about to me and to us, changing people's lives and being that ripple that we talked about at Impact at the beginning. It's about the ripple.
Yeah,
we want you all to be part of the ripple.
Yeah, and we definitely appreciate Beta Gamma Sigma being part of helping us get the message out as well. They also have a link to our podcast on the resources as well. I think that's in Career Central, Matt.
Yes, that's correct. So if you had to leave early or if you missed it, it will be on Career Central. And don't forget, you guys can get the list of notes and everything from the link that we've been sharing. That's gocardavera.com/confidentbgs. And Craig and Jeff, thank you again for joining us. I know this is your second webinar with us. It's always fantastic, always incredibly insightful. Thank you for being so interactive with the chat and in the Q&A. Really appreciate that.
Sure, glad to be here.
Right. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. Lead on.